I never thought the words that would shatter me most would come from my own daughter. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, when Sarah looked me in the eye across my kitchen table. The same table where I'd served her breakfast every morning for 18 years. Where she'd done her homework while I helped her with fractions and book reports. Where we'd laughed over silly jokes and cried over her first heartbreak, and told me I didn't matter anymore. The light was fading outside, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor that I'd scrubbed 1,000 times, and in that golden hour glow, everything felt surreal, like I was watching my life crumble from somewhere outside my own body. "Mom, I need you to understand something," she'd said. Her voice cold and measured in a way I'd never heard before, like she'd rehearsed this speech. "David and I have been talking, and we think it's time you stopped inserting yourself into our lives. We're adults now, we have our own family, we need space." Space, such a simple word, but the way she said it felt like a chasm opening between us. I'd stared at her, at this woman I'd raised, and barely recognized her. When had she become so hard? When had her eyes learned to look through me instead of at me? "I don't understand," I'd whispered, my hands trembling around my coffee mug. "What have I done?" She'd sighed, that particular sigh children reserve for parents they've deemed burdensome. "It's not about what you've done, Mom. It's about what you keep doing. You're always here. Always calling. Always asking questions about Emma and Jack. Always offering advice we didn't ask for. David feels like you're undermining him as a father, and honestly, I'm starting to feel the same way." The words had hit me like physical blows. Me undermining David. I'd been the one watching Emma and Jack 3 days a week since they were born. I was the one who'd rocked Emma through colic for hours, while Sarah caught up on sleep. I was the one who'd rushed over at 2 in the morning, when Jack had croup and Sarah had been panicking. I'd given up my book club, my pottery classes, my Thursday movie nights with Linda, all so I could be available whenever Sarah needed me, and I'd done it gladly, joyfully, because that's what mothers do. That's what love looks like. But sitting there in my kitchen that Tuesday, with my daughter's eyes hard as stones, I realized that somewhere along the way, my love had been reclassified as interference. My devotion had become suffocation. My presence had become unwanted. "Sarah, sweetheart, if I've overstepped, I'm sorry," I'd said, reaching for her hand across the table. She'd pulled away. "I only want to help, you know that. You and the kids, you're my whole world. That's the problem, Mom," she'd replied, standing up and gathering her purse. "We can't be your whole world. It's too much pressure. You need to find your own life. David and I need to raise our children our way, without constant commentary from you. We need you to back off, as if I'd been some kind of intruder rather than the grandmother who'd been there for every milestone, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. I'd felt something inside me crack, like ice breaking on a winter pond, and the cold water of rejection rushing in. "How long should I back off?" I'd asked, my voice barely audible. "A week? A month?" She'd poised at the door, not quite meeting my eyes. "We'll call you when we're ready. David thinks maybe it's best if you don't come around for a while. Give us some time to establish our boundaries." And then she was gone, leaving me alone in a house that suddenly felt cavernous and silent. I'd sat there as the sun set completely, as the kitchen grew dark around me, unable to move, unable to think beyond the pounding refrain in my head. "I don't matter anymore. I don't matter anymore. I don't matter anymore. My name is Margaret Ellen Russo, and I'm 62 years old. I've been a widow for 7 years, since my husband Tom died of a sudden heart attack while mowing the lawn on a Saturday morning. Before that, I was a wife and a mother, and before that, I was a young woman with dreams of becoming a teacher, dreams I'd set aside when I got pregnant with Sarah at 23. Tom and I had agreed I'd stay home with the kids, Sarah and her younger brother Michael, and I'd poured everything I had into making our house a home, into raising good humans, into being the kind of mother I'd never had myself. My own mother had been cold and distant, more concerned with appearances than affection, and I'd promised myself that my children would never question whether they were loved. They would never feel alone. They would always know they had a safe harbor to return to. Maybe that was my first mistake, building my entire identity around being their shelter from the storm. Because when the storms of their lives calmed, they no longer needed shelter. They just needed me to disappear. The first week after Sarah's ultimatum was the longest of my life. I'd wake up each morning forgetting for a blissful moment that anything had changed, and then reality would crash over me. No little voices would be calling, "Grandma," at my door. No tiny hands would be tugging me toward the backyard to see bugs or flowers. No Sarah would be dropping by with coffee and conversation. My phone sat silent on the kitchen counter, and I'd catch myself reaching for it a dozen times a day, wanting to call, wanting to check in, wanting to know if Emma's cold had gotten better or if Jack had finally mastered tying his shoes. But I didn't call. I gave them their space, even as it killed me, even as I felt myself becoming invisible, irrelevant, erased. I tried to fill my days. I went to the library and checked out novels I never finished. I took walks around the neighborhood, noting how many families were out together, grandparents included, and wondered what I'd done so wrong. I cleaned my house until it sparkled, organizing closets that didn't need organizing, scrubbing grout that was already clean, anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from spiraling. But at night, alone in the big bed where Tom and I had planned our future, where we'd whispered about growing old together and spoiling our grandchildren, I'd cry until my pillow was soaked. Michael, bless him, called from Seattle where he lived with his wife and 2 kids. "Mom, Sarah told me what happened," he'd said, his voice careful. "I think she's being too harsh. You know how she gets." "Do I though?" I'd asked him, because I thought I knew her, and then she looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was a burden she'd been too polite to discard. "She's under a lot of stress," Michael had offered. "David's job, the kids, that whole mess with her friend group. She's taking it out on you because you're safe. You're the one who'll always forgive her." But would I? Could I? How do you forgive someone for making you feel worthless? For taking the one thing that gave your life meaning and declaring it unwanted? "Come visit us, Mom," Michael had urged. "Fly out for a few weeks. The kids would love to see you, and Jen's been asking about you." I'd promised him I'd think about it, but the truth was I couldn't imagine leaving. What if Sarah changed her mind? What if the kids needed me? What if I missed my chance to fix whatever I'd broken? So I stayed, trapped in this limbo of waiting, of hoping, of slowly unraveling. It was Linda, my friend of 30 years, who finally dragged me out of my house 3 weeks after Sarah's pronouncement. She'd shown up unannounced, took one look at me, and declared, "Margaret Russo, you look like death warmed over. Get dressed. We're going to lunch, and then we're going to talk about what you're going to do with the rest of your life." Over chicken salad at the corner bistro, Linda had leaned forward and taken my hand. "Honey, I've watched you disappear into motherhood, then widowhood, then grandmotherhood, and I've never said anything, because it seemed to make you happy. But look at you now. You've given so much of yourself away that there's nothing left. Sarah was wrong in how she did it, but maybe she's not entirely wrong about the need for boundaries." I'd felt defensive anger flare. "You think I'm the problem. I think you made yourself so available, so essential, that they started taking you for granted," Linda had said gently, "and now they're rejecting that dependence in the worst possible way. But Margaret, listen to me. You are not just someone's mother or grandmother. You're a brilliant, capable, interesting woman who gave up everything for other people. When's the last time you did something just for yourself? When's the last time you even thought about what you wanted?" I'd opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't remember. Decades maybe. Before Sarah was born. Before I'd become defined by my relationships to other people rather than by who I was as an individual. What would I even do? I'd asked, and hearing the helplessness in my own voice had embarrassed me. "Anything," Linda had said, her eyes fierce with conviction. "Everything. You were going to be a teacher, remember? You loved working with kids. You loved literature and history and making things come alive for people. That passion didn't die just because life took a different turn. It's still in you, Margaret. You just have to find it again." That conversation planted a seed. A small, fragile thing, but it started to grow. I began thinking about who'd been before I'd become Mrs. Tom Russo, before I'd become Sarah and Michael's mom, before I'd become Emma and Jack's grandma. I'd been Margaret Ellen Crawford, a girl who loved books and storytelling, who'd wanted to fill classrooms with wonder, who'd believed she could make a difference in young lives. That girl felt like a stranger now, someone I'd glimpsed in old photographs and barely recognized. But maybe, just maybe, I could find her again. I started small. I contacted the community college about adult education classes, and signed up for a literature course that met Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I joined a local volunteer program that paired seniors with elementary school kids who needed reading tutors. I returned to my pottery class, my hands remembering the feel of clay even after years away. I said yes when Linda invited me to her book club, and when her neighbor Stan, a widower of 3 years, asked if I'd like to get coffee sometime, I surprised myself by agreeing. The days began to have shape again, purpose beyond waiting for a phone call that never came. I was still hurt, still angry, still heartbroken over Sarah's rejection, but I was also discovering something unexpected. I liked the woman I was becoming, or maybe rediscovering. The woman who had opinions about postmodern literature and could debate Toni Morrison with passion. The woman who made 7-year-old Tyler laugh until milk came out of his nose when I did funny voices during our reading sessions. The woman whose pottery, rough and imperfect, nonetheless had something to say. Stan turned out to be kind and funny, with crinkles around his eyes and a gentle way of listening that made me feel heard. We went to museums and movies, took drives along the coast, talked about our late spouses and our complicated relationships with our grown children. He didn't try to fix me or rush me into anything. He just offered companionship, and slowly, carefully, I opened myself to the possibility that my life wasn't over just because my daughter had deemed me unnecessary. 2 months passed, then 3, the holidays came and went, and Sarah sent a generic card with a family photo but no personal note, no invitation to visit, no acknowledgement of the gaping wound in both our lives. I sent gifts for Emma and Jack through the mail, carefully chosen and wrapped, and received a perfunctory thank you text from Sarah days later. Each interaction felt transactional, cold, nothing like the warm relationship we'd once had. Michael and his family flew out for Thanksgiving, filling my house with noise and love and reminding me what it felt like to be wanted. His kids, older than Sarah's, still hugged me tight and fought over who got to sleep in Grandma's guest room. Jen, his wife, pulled me aside and said, "I don't know what's going on with Sarah, but I need you to know. You're an amazing mother and grandmother. Don't let her convince you otherwise." The words helped, but they couldn't quite heal the Sarah-shaped hole in my heart. It was a Friday afternoon in late February when my phone finally rang with Sarah's name on the screen. My heart lurched, and despite everything, despite the months of silence and hurt, I answered on the second ring, hating myself for being so eager, so desperate for any crumb of connection. "Mom." Sarah's voice was tight, stressed. "I need your help. Not hello, how are you? Not I'm sorry for disappearing from your life. Just I need your help." The old Margaret would have said yes immediately, would have dropped everything and run to her rescue. But I'd been working with a therapist Linda had recommended, and I'd learned some things about boundaries, about self-respect, about not enabling people to treat you poorly. "What kind of help?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "David's mother had a stroke. We have to fly to Phoenix immediately. She's in the ICU and it's bad. We'll be gone at least a week, maybe longer. I need you to watch Emma and Jack." The audacity of it took my breath away. After months of telling me to back off, of insisting they didn't need me, of making me feel like my presence in their lives was toxic, she was calling because she needed something. Because I was useful again. "Sarah," I said slowly, "have you forgotten our last conversation, when you told me I needed to back off? When you said I didn't matter anymore?" There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Mom, I never said you didn't matter. Don't be dramatic. I said we needed space. You said I was too much, that I was undermining David, that you'd call when you were ready. It's been almost 4 months. 4 months of silence. And now you need me, so suddenly I'm allowed back into your life. This is an emergency." Her voice rose, panic bleeding through. "David's mother might die. We don't have time for you to be petty about hurt feelings." Petty. My hurt feelings were petty. The months of crying myself to sleep, of questioning my worth as a mother and grandmother, of rebuilding my shattered sense of self. All of that was petty compared to her needs. "I'm not being petty," I said, and I was proud that my voice stayed steady. "I'm protecting myself. You pushed me away, Sarah. You made it very clear that my involvement in your life was unwanted. I've respected that boundary. I've built a new life. I can't just drop everything and be at your beck and call when it's convenient for you. So you're punishing me." She was crying now, and the sound tugged at every maternal instinct I had. "Your grandchildren need you, and you're refusing out of spite." "I'm not refusing. I'm asking you to understand that actions have consequences. You hurt me, Sarah, deeply, and you've never once apologized or even acknowledged that hurt. You just expect me to be available whenever you decide you need me, and that's not how relationships work." There was a long silence. Then, in a small voice I hadn't heard from her in years, she said, "I'm scared, Mom. David's mom might die, and I don't know what to do. The kids are confused and scared. I need my mother. Please." And there it was. The vulnerability, the need, the crack in her armor. The old Margaret would have crumbled. But the new Margaret, the one who'd been going therapy and learning about self, worth and healthy boundaries, knew that enabling bad behavior wasn't loving, it was just perpetuating a cycle. "I'll watch the kids," I said finally, "but when you get back we're going to talk, really talk, about how you made me feel, about boundaries that go both ways, about respect. If you want me in your life, it has to be as a person, not just as free childcare. Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you. Thank you. Can you come get them in an hour? I'll have their bags packed." After we hung up, I sat for a long moment, staring at my phone. Stan was supposed to take me to dinner that night. I had my literature class on Tuesday. I had a life now, one that wasn't just about being available for others. But Emma and Jack were innocent in all this. They were just kids who needed their grandmother. And despite everything, I loved them fiercely. I called Stan and explained the situation. He said immediately, "Those kids need you. We'll do dinner next week. But Margaret, don't let her take advantage. You've worked too hard to find yourself again." When I arrived at Sarah's house an hour later, the scene was chaos. Suitcases were scattered across the living room. David was on the phone, his face pale and drawn. Emma, 8 years old now, was crying in the corner, and Jack, 6, was clinging to his mother's leg. Sarah looked haggard, her hair puckered in a messy ponytail, mascara smudged under her eyes. When Emma saw me, she broke away and ran into my arms. "Grandma! I missed you so much!" "Where have you been?" The question was a knife to my heart. Where had I been? I'd been right here, waiting, pushed away, made to feel unwanted, but I couldn't say that to an 8-year-old. "I've been right here, sweetheart," I said, holding her tight. "I'm here now. That's what matters." Jack joined the embrace, and for a moment, I let myself be flooded by the pure, uncomplicated love of grandchildren. They didn't care about boundaries or adult complications. They just knew their grandma was back, and everything would be okay. Sarah approached hesitantly. Up close, I could see the toll the last months had taken on her too. She looked older, tired, like life had been grinding her down. For a moment, I saw the scared little girl she'd once been, the one who'd crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, and my anger softened slightly. "Thank you, Mom," she said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. "I know I don't deserve this." "No," I agreed, "you don't. But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for them." Something flickered across her face, hurt, maybe, or recognition, but David was calling her, saying they had to leave for the airport, and there was no time for the conversation we needed to have. She kissed the kids goodbye, promised to call every day, and then they were gone, leaving me alone with 2 confused children and a week stretching ahead. That week with Emma and Jack was both healing and heartbreaking. They were so hungry for my attention, so desperate to tell me everything I'd missed. Emma had learned cursive and won a spelling bee. Jack had lost 3 teeth and joined soccer. They showed me art projects and school papers, performed elaborate plays they'd made up, insisted I read their favorite books with all the voices they remembered. "Why haven't you come to see us, Grandma?" Emma asked one night as I tucked her in. "Did we do something wrong?" "Oh, sweetheart, no," I said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults have complicated feelings and make mistakes. But I've missed you every single day. Mom said you were busy with your own life. Jack piped up from the other bed. I'd moved them both into the guest room so they could be together, and they loved it, treating it like a sleepover every night. I admitted. Sometimes people need to figure out who they are, even grandmas, but that doesn't mean I stopped loving you. I could never stop loving you. The weight of their trust, their uncomplicated affection, reminded me why I'd been willing to sacrifice so much. Children were worth it. But I'd learned something important these past months. You could love your family fiercely without disappearing into them. You could be present without being consumed. You could give without giving yourself away. Sarah called every day, but our conversations were brief and focused on the kids. David's mother was stable but had significant damage. They'd be gone longer than planned, maybe 2 weeks. Was that okay? I can manage, I told her. But Sarah, we still need to talk. I know, she said, and she sounded tired. When I get back, I promise. The second week I enrolled Emma and Jack in my routine. They came with me to my pottery class, their small hands making wonky bowls and lopsided animals that they declared masterpieces. They met Stan, who won them over by teaching Jack to whistle and helping Emma with her math homework. They came to my tutoring session at the library and sat quietly reading while I worked with Tyler, and afterward, Emma declared she wanted to be a teacher just like Grandma. Just like Grandma. Not just like Mom. It made me think about what kind of example I'd been setting all these years. A woman who defined herself only through others, who had no life of her own, who waited patiently to be needed. What would Emma learn from that? What would Jack? But this new version of me, the one with hobbies and friends and interests, the one who laughed more and smiled easier, maybe that was a better example. Maybe showing them that even grandmas were whole people with their own dreams and desires was the greatest gift I could give them. Sarah and David returned on a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks and 3 days after they'd left. David's mother had survived but would need extensive rehabilitation. They looked exhausted, emotionally wrung out, older somehow. The kids ran to them with shrieks of joy, and I watched the reunion with a mixture of happiness for them and sadness for myself, knowing this temporary return to normalcy would end. After the kids were in bed, Sarah finally asked if we could talk. David excused himself, giving us privacy, and Sarah and I sat across from each other in her living room, me on the couch, her in the armchair, a coffee table between us like a demilitarized zone. Mom, she began, and her eyes were already filling with tears. I owe you an apology. A huge one. I've been thinking a lot these past 2 weeks, especially watching David with his mother, wondering if he'll get more time with her, and I realized what I did to you. What I said to you. How I pushed you away when you were only trying to love us. I waited, letting her continue. I was overwhelmed, she said, the words tumbling out. David's job was stressing him out, and he was coming home frustrated and taking it out on me. The kids were going through difficult phases. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't taking care of myself. And you were there, always there, being perfect and helpful and everything I wasn't. And instead of appreciating it, I resented it. I resented that you made it look easy when it felt so hard for me. I resented that the kids sometimes seemed to prefer you. I resented that David would ask why I couldn't be more like you. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, mascara streaking again. So I lashed out. I told myself you were overbearing, that you were trying to take over, that we needed space. But the truth is I was jealous. I was insecure. And I was stupid, so incredibly stupid. Because the moment I needed you, you were there. Even after how I treated you, you came. You took care of my babies. You didn't punish them for my mistakes. And Emma kept talking about all the things you've been doing. Your classes, your pottery, and your new friend Stan. And I realized you've built this whole life. And I almost destroyed my chance to be part of it. The tears were flowing freely now, and I felt my own eyes burning. You really hurt me, Sarah. I know, she sobbed. I know I did. And I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to make it right. But I need you to know, you matter, Mom. You matter so much. You're not just free childcare or an obligation. You're my mother, and I love you, and I'm so sorry for making you feel like you didn't matter. I let her cry for a moment, let her words sink in. They were the words I'd needed to hear for months. But I'd also learned something important in those months. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't make myself small again, available for every need, disappearing into their lives while having none of my own. I accept your apology, I said finally. But things need to be different going forward. I love you and the kids more than anything in this world, but I also need my own life. I need my classes and my friends and my time. I can't be on call 24/7 anymore. I can't drop everything every time you need something. We need balance, Sarah, real balance. She nodded vigorously. Yes, absolutely, whatever you need. I don't want to lose you. These past months without you, even though it was my own fault, they were awful. The kids kept asking for you. I kept reaching for the phone to call you and remembering I couldn't. I missed my mom. I moved to sit beside her, and she collapsed against me like she used to when she was little, when a skinned knee or a mean friend could be solved with a hug and a kiss. We were both crying now, months of hurt and loneliness pouring out. I missed you too, baby. I whispered into her hair, every single day. We talked for hours that night, really talked, about expectations and boundaries, and what a healthy relationship between us might look like. Sarah admitted that David had been struggling with feeling inadequate as a provider, and her mother-in-law had been making snide comments comparing him to his brother, and somehow I'd become caught in the crossfire of his insecurity. She admitted that she'd been drowning, and instead of asking for help in a healthy way, she'd pushed away the person trying to throw her a life preserver. I need to work on myself, she said. Maybe talk to someone. I've been so anxious and angry all the time. And I'm taking it out on everyone around me. That's not the mother I want to be. That's not the daughter I want to be. Therapy helped me, I offered. After you cut me off, I started seeing someone. It's been good. Really good. She looked surprised. You're in therapy. Sweetheart, you devastated me. I needed help putting myself back together. And I'm glad I did, because I like who I'm becoming. Tell me about Stan, she said, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice, not judgment. So I told her about the coffee dates and the museums and how nice it was to have companionship, to feel like a woman and not just a mother or grandmother. Her eyes were wide. Mom, are you dating? There was wonder in her voice, and something that sounded almost like pride. I suppose I am, I admitted, feeling my cheeks flush. Is that weird? No, she said firmly. It's wonderful. You deserve to be happy. You deserve to have your own life. I'm sorry I ever made you feel like you didn't. When I finally left that night, Sarah hugged me tight at the door. Can we do dinner this weekend? All of us. The kids have missed Sunday dinners with you. I'd like that, I said. But Sarah, if you ever feel overwhelmed again, if things get hard, talk to me. Don't push me away. We're family. We work through things together. That's how this is supposed to work. I promise, she said, and this time, I believed her. The months that followed weren't perfect. Sarah and I had to navigate our new dynamic, learning where the boundaries were, how to ask for and offer help without falling into old patterns. She started therapy, which seemed to help. David apologized to me, admitting he'd been taking his frustrations out on Sarah, and that I'd been an easy scapegoat. Their marriage was stronger for having confronted their problems, and Sarah seemed lighter somehow, more like herself. I continued with my classes and my pottery and my tutoring. Stan and I grew closer, and eventually I introduced him to the family at one of our Sunday dinners. Emma and Jack loved him immediately, especially when he showed up with a magic trick kit, and spent the evening making them scream with laughter. Sarah pulled me aside in the kitchen and whispered, "He's wonderful, Mom. Dad would approve." The comment made me cry because it was true. Tom would have wanted me to find companionship, to find joy, to keep living after he was gone. He would have been proud of the woman I'd become. Someone who loved fiercely but not at the expense of herself. Someone who'd learned that boundaries weren't walls, but bridges to healthier relationships. One Sunday in late spring, almost a year after Sarah's devastating pronouncement, we were all in my backyard for a barbecue. Stan was grilling burgers. Emma and Jack were chasing butterflies. Sarah and David were setting the table. And I was sitting in a lawn chair, watching it all, marveling at how much had changed, and how much had stayed the same. Sarah brought me a glass of lemonade and sat in the chair beside me. "Penny, for your thoughts. Just thinking about how strange life is." I said, "Year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought losing you meant losing everything. But I found myself instead. And then I got you back, but better. Healthier." She reached over and took my hand. "I'm glad you didn't let me destroy you, Mom. I'm glad you fought to be your own person. You've taught me something important. That I can be a good mother without disappearing into motherhood. That loving my kids doesn't mean I can't love myself too. You're modeling that for me now, and I needed to see it." Emma ran up then, breathless and grass-stained, a dandelion clutched in her fist. "Grandma, this is for you!" "Make a wish." I took the fluffy dandelion and looked at the faces around me. My daughter, learning to be stronger, my grandchildren, growing up surrounded by love, Stan, offering the promise of new beginnings, Michael on video chat from Seattle, included in our gathering even from across the country. What was there to wish for? I had everything I needed, but I closed my eyes anyway and made a wish, not for myself, but for anyone who'd ever felt invisible, who'd ever been told they didn't matter, who'd ever lost themselves in loving others. I wished they'd find their way back to themselves. That they'd discover their worth wasn't dependent on being needed, that they'd learn the most important love story is the one you have with yourself. I opened my eyes and blew, sending dandelion seeds spiraling into the blue sky, each one carrying possibility. "What did you wish for, Grandma?" Jack asked, tugging on my sleeve. "Can't tell," I said, pulling him into my lap. "Then it won't come true." But the truth was it already had. I'd wished to matter, not just to others but to myself. And finally, beautifully I did. Sarah had been wrong that Tuesday afternoon in my kitchen. I had always mattered. I'd just forgotten, and it had taken losing everything to remember. Sometimes the greatest gift life gives us is the chance to find ourselves again, even in the wreckage of rejection. Sometimes we have to break before we can build something stronger. As the sun set over my backyard, painting everything gold and rose, I realized this was what healing looked like. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole nonetheless. I was Margaret Ellen Russo, and I was enough, as a mother, as a grandmother, and most importantly, as myself, and that mattered, that would always matter. The story of how I almost lost myself, and found something better instead wasn't the story I thought I'd be telling. But it was mine, authentically mine, and I wouldn't change a single painful moment of it, because on the other side of that pain was this beautiful, complicated, imperfect, precious life. And I was finally, truly living it.